When most folks consider compassion, the first thought is extending it to other people. However, there are often limits to whom we offer that compassion. For example, it can be easier to feel toward children, people who experience crime, tragedy, illness, or those who might be considered victims. Oftentimes, it's easier to be compassionate to those who are like us, shutting out those we see as other. Radical welcoming is one of our Unitarian Universalist spiritual practices. One of the ways we express this is by honoring someone's preferred pronoun. We set ourselves free from the binary of she or he, and thankfully, society is catching up and moving past the mandate against using they as a pronoun for a single person. What about when we refer to non-humans? The most common pronoun is it when speaking of a spider, ant, bird, or dog. It creates a distance, a separation. It goes against our UU 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. As I read Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, I learned about the grammar of animacy. Animacy is a way of respecting non-human beings by expressing that they have a spirit, are alive and sentient. The grammar of animacy would never use the pronoun it to describe a living being, just as in English we wouldn't use it when speaking about a person. The author gives the example of seeing your grandmother in the kitchen and saying, "It is making soup." Sounds strange, right? This is because it goes against our fundamental sense of respect and reduces a person to a thing, someone to something. As a personal practice, I've long been using the language of someone, not something, and saying them instead of it in reference to non-human animals. I had no idea I'd been speaking the language of animacy. Dr. Kimmerer sums this up. The arrogance of English is that the only way to be animate, to be worthy of respect and moral concern, is to be a human. Every genocide begins with dehumanizing language. Once we move someone outside of what we believe is humanity, it becomes possible to do anything to them. And that's not the only way that our language can lead to annihilation. Years ago, I learned that our communication is unnecessarily embedded with violence. Has anyone ever said to you, "I need to be brutally honest"? Why add brutality when honesty will do? Other common phrases are killing time when there's space in our schedules, bite the bullet when we're being courageous, and shoot from the hip when someone is being direct. These expressions are so normalized that their aggressiveness might be easy to miss. And just listen to the sayings we use that include non-human animals. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. More than one way to skin a cat. And don't beat a dead horse. Why such violence when we could feed 2 birds with 1 scone, have more than one way to peel a potato, and know that there's no need to feed a fed horse? Is it possible that cruel language could hinder our compassion and shut down parts of our souls? In the book Helium, spoken word poet Rudy Francisco writes of being asked to kill a spider in a poem titled Mercy. Recognizing that the spider is simply living their life without being a bother, Rudy instead chooses a cup and a napkin to relocate and free the spider. He says that if ever he is found in the wrong place at the wrong time, just being alive, his hope is to be met with the same kind of mercy. Not a casual hope for a Black man in this country. Although I consistently relocate spiders, my compassion can get sloppy when it comes to mosquitoes. And sometimes I'm too hasty to treat ants with the mercy I would like to receive myself. When I don't take the time to act with care, I feel guilty. It comes at a great cost to my integrity when I override my natural states of empathy and compassion. Seeing someone, not something, is a way to look with the eyes of compassion. Our capacity isn't limited. The more we learn, open ourselves to the hard things, and empathize, the more our compassion can grow. the more we can do the hard things. Using the language of animacy can help us be more inclusive. By changing the way we think and speak, we can change the way we live and act.
Allison, thank you. I so appreciate your insight and heart. Thanks for leading us along this piece of the path of compassion. Really beautiful. Poet Marge Piercy, writing of oppression and solidarity and unity as she so often does, concludes her poem, The Low Road, by writing, "It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more." That's the call that comes with cultivating compassion. Saying we, knowing who you mean, and each day meaning one more. It's the call of the compassionate side of every life-enhancing religious tradition, including our Unitarian Universalist tradition, which asks that we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, or as some have already expanded it, the inherent worth and dignity of every being. Religion is sometimes framed as having both a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension. The vertical dimension of religion is the transcendent dimension, which has to do with one's sense of connection and relationship to what is ultimately beyond us, to God, to spirit, to life itself, to the process of evolution, to the unfolding universe, to random chance. That vertical dimension is the transcendent dimension. The horizontal dimension of religion has to do with our relationships with each other, our relationships to humanity and to other animals, to the world on this very concrete, interactive plane. Cultivating our compassion extends the range of our care and our concern, our sense of who we really mean by we, on the horizontal dimension of religion. It's anchored in and it's inspired by and fed by our transcendent sense of the nature of the world and existence. But it manifests and it plays out in the widening circles of whose well-being we care about on this horizontal, currently COVID-19 graced plane, where our compassion is as our compassion does. Those of us who've been around for a while have had many chances to extend our circle of care and our compassion outward. And so we know that the boundaries are not fixed, and that how our compassion extends is ultimately up to us. We've had chances to learn of other persons and other cultures' edges of compassion in ways that ask us to question our own arbitrary limits. I appreciate the story, Hey Little Ant, that Lindsay read earlier. And I appreciate Allison sharing at other times her own ethical framework for her eating decisions. Our relationships to insects and to eating are two great places to start. I confess, I have killed many insects in my lifetime because they were bothersome or worrisome or dangerous, or I thought they were, or potentially painful. Though I still rarely have immediate qualms about swatting a mosquito, I have to say, I do keep a plastic cup and a stiff piece of cardboard on hand, of cardstock, to sequester and carry out and liberate most critters that I find in the apartment. In fact, most recently, just this morning, a spider in the bathtub. Then I think of Jainism, of this most ancient of religious traditions, which teaches that the highest religious duty, without which a religion is useless, they say, is not to kill or harm any being. That's the highest duty of religion in Jainism. such that not only are Jains typically vegetarian, but the most devoted Jains sweep the path in front of them as they walk, lest they unknowingly step on an ant or any other life form. And some wear a cloth over their faces, over their nose and mouth, not to prevent the spread of a virus necessarily, but to prevent the possibility of accidentally inhaling or ingesting a gnat. A contemporary Jain nun living in London explained that she was obligated to eat every part of the food she was given, because if any of the food were thrown away in the garbage, microorganisms would grow on the food, and then those microorganisms would die in the trash bin. I know, that sounds extreme, or at least like way too much work and bother to most of us. But it points out that the edges of human compassion are not universal, that the range, in fact, is very wide. So it's about our choice. I remember being challenged years ago when I first learned that some people in some places eat dogs and cats and insects. I remember one photograph in a National Geographic magazine of a young man with a giant walking stick on his shoulders, almost 2 feet long walking stick. It was on a leash, and he was raising it to become a future meal. I was shocked and disgusted by that possibility. And that kind of encounter asked me to ask myself, well, why? Why not eat dogs and cats and horses and rats and walking sticks if one is going to eat cows and pigs and chickens and escargot, snails, and horsehoof gelatin? Who draws the lines? The lines are not universal as I had assumed when I was young. It's not that everybody knows or believes the same thing. They are shaped, those lines, by the norms of our families and our communities, by our religious traditions, and by our own experience. So the question is, where do I draw the lines of my care and concern, my compassion? What are the front and the growing edges of my compassion? You don't have to move very far at all to get from those questions to the Black Lives Mattering moment that's on fire right now. Who do we mean when we say we? A national legacy of enslaving other human beings and centuries of continuing enculturation work against those of us who are white people learning to include Black persons in our meaning of we. Built into our governance, our politics, our economics, our stories, and our many systems, our associations of fear and disgust, of danger and illness with Black persons and other persons of color. It's playing out even now, as some people claim that it's Black people's behavior or unique physiology that accounts for the higher rates of COVID-19 infection in Black communities. It's perpetuated in our language, as Allison named earlier. Here's one important example. The shift from using the term slaves to using the term people who were enslaved. I've mentioned this before. It takes on even more powerful resonance right now. Most reporters and commentators are starting to catch on, but not all. To label someone a slave is to say that that is an inherent part of that person's nature, that being a slave is who that person is, but they are by nature a slave. It places the cause of their enslavement on their own shoulders. To speak, on the other hand, of people who were enslaved retains the humanity of those persons and identifies them as we, and puts the responsibility for their enslavement where it belongs, on the enslavers, on the people who choose to enslave other human beings. A small change in wording with tremendous implications for how we portray and see Black people, and for shifting the line of care and inclusion. This third Sunday, exploring compassion, as we move from self-compassion and compassion for other people in our more immediate circles to expanding who we mean when we say we, our invitation to you is to identify one growing edge of your compassion, where the line is being challenged or tested or stretched or loosened or opened, and to consider whether and in what ways you are being called to extend your compassion out a little bit farther. Maybe the current edge of your compassion has to do with which animals or which life forms you're able to feel empathy with, such that you want them not to suffer, want them to be happy, to be healthy, to be at ease. Maybe the current edge of your compassion has to do with an entire group of people, a culture, a race, a gender, a political persuasion, a nationality, a clique. Maybe the current edge of your compassion has to do with someone very near, a family member or a friend or a person whose behavior grates on your nerves somehow. The indicator or clue that you are at an edge might be that someone, some being, is just outside the ring of your inclusion right now, just outside your sense of we. Someone you are holding just out of reach in the category of other in some way. And you're not feeling entirely right or at ease about that. Who's just outside of your circle in a way that has you feeling, not quite right. We invite you to spend some time this week and some attention on your edge. This is the let's do part. You might settle into the meta meditation, using that each day, starting with may I be filled with loving kindness, etc. May you, may we, may all. You might practice using a different pronoun for beings this week, other than it. You might notice the language that you're using or hearing. See if something's unnecessarily violent or it inaccurately claims to capture someone's essence, like slave versus enslaved. Maybe what you do is you get a cup ready and a stiff piece of paper and you have it ready to liberate the critters you don't really want to share space with at the moment. Maybe you choose not to step on that ant or to look a little more carefully where you're walking this week. Maybe you make different choices about what you eat. Cultivating compassion is about moving outward at our current edge, our current line. And practicing compassion changes us. Yes, it will change how we interact with others to their benefit, ideally, but it will change us, not only on the horizontal dimension of how we hold our relationships, but also on the vertical dimension, that sense of what transcends us, of what's most important, what's ultimately important. And when that internal, that vertical piece shifts, who knows what else could happen on the horizontal plane. My wish for you is that you may know compassion for yourself, for your immediate circle, for those inside but close to the edge, and for those who are just outside the circle at the moment. May that be so. Now, I invite you also, I'm going to share my screen, to consider using the hearts, whether you draw these or download from the email. The first week I invited you to fill in that center with words or artwork, doodling, anything, collage that spoke to your sense of self-compassion. Last week, as you worked on extending that compassion to people who you care about, people you don't even know, and people who are challenging, invited you to work on this next round this week. So I invite you to fill that in now if you haven't. Here are a couple examples from Allison and myself, our versions of what our experience has been, trying to do that extending. This coming week, after this week of exploring your edges, I invite you in that next layer of that series of hearts to portray that pursuit of extending the edge of your compassion. Again, maybe you write something, maybe it's words that you write, or maybe it's something more colorful and visual. Any way that you want to use that, I invite you to capture your experience.